All right, welcome to another episode of the Cover 2 series. I am NFL Outdated, and this episode is on the New York Jets, and I am joined by Jon Jeune from Now We Have Liftoff NYJ podcast. How's it going?
Hey Andy, how's it going, man? Pleasure to be on, man. Thanks for having me. Obviously, here to talk some New York Jets. Host the Now We Have Liftoff New York Jets podcast, where we talk about our favorite team. Favorite team of the host there, the New York Jets. So love them or hate them for what they do to us emotionally on a week-to-week basis, year-to-year basis. Still got to support them. So that's where you could find anything New York Jets. If you want to listen to anything about fantasy football, then you can catch me on Fantasy Football Diagnostics podcast, where we go 3 times a week. We've got a little holiday schedule right now where we're only going 2 times a week, but mostly 3 times a week. We cover every game. We break down every single game, the fantasy, the bet, the totals, the sides, all of it. So if you're into that, then you can definitely check that out as well.
Absolutely, and I had a little bit of a slip up there. I said NYG, so tell me a little bit from what you've seen of the sharing the stadium. How is that going with the Jets and the Giants?
Yeah, man. I mean, it's funny because the Jets and Giants have this, interstate rivalry thing going on, and
Mm-hmm.
there's this like hatred for both teams, and none of that really started until like Rex Ryan got here.
Really? Yeah.
I mean, the Giants were the Giants, and the Jets were the Jets, and obviously, the Giants didn't really have much success as of late, right? Until like 2004 when they ended up beating the Patriots, which at the time, right, if you ask any Jet fan who they were rooting for in that game, right, like 100 out of 100 would tell you they were rooting for the Giants, like in that Super Bowl, right?
Yeah.
So, you don't want to see your division rival, the New England Patriots, go undefeated 19-0
Right.
and win a Super Bowl, right? So, was 100% rooting for the Giants. And it wasn't until the next year Rex Ryan got there, and Rex Ryan was, starts talking all this stuff about how, we're going to be the best team in, the division. He's not here to kiss Bill Belichick's rings, and that they're going to be the big brother in New York, and that the Giants are going to be little brother. And, it's just going, Giants are catching stray bullets in Rex Ryan's introductory press conference.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
then I remember that game in 2012. The Jets and Giants both really needed a win. And, what was it, even 2012? No, it was 2011. Jets and Giants both need a win. And, Eli Manning's backed up on the 1 yard line. There was a pass to Victor Cruz, like on an out route, just takes it down the sideline, 99 yards to the house. Does a little salsa. The Giants end up winning, and the Giants end up going on to not lose another game for the rest of the season. End up winning a Super Bowl against, you've guessed it, the New England Patriots. And Rex Ryan was fired 2 years after, a year after that. And, we're just kind of sitting here. Neither one of these teams is good, but the Giants are like, well, we have 2 Super Bowls over the last, 15 years. So what do you have to say for it? And it's, I do root against the Giants, but I don't really have any hatred for it. It's not like, how I feel about the division rivals.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of look at it. I mean, sharing the stadium. I'm sure it's kind of interesting in changing things over. And but you look at the two teams. The Giants do have the Super Bowls, and that is huge. Overall, and obviously we can kind of peel the layers back as we get into this. But just kind of an overview. Who is close to the Super Bowl right now? The Jets or the Giants?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, right? Because I think the Giants are, when you look at the Giants, you look at their core players, right? They're older, they're veterans. A lot of their best players are either on their second or third contracts, or you know entering their second contract, ready to get a second contract, like Saquon Barkley, Daniel Jones, and you kind of have to assess, like, do the Giants want to pay Saquon Barkley all that money? Do you want to commit to Daniel Jones for the future? So I think you have more questions on, like, at the more important positions. Like, you still have to wonder, like, is Joe Judge the guy? Like, you don't have a
Mhm.
general manager. And so I kind of look at this question as, I'll kind of not change the question, but I'll look at it a different way, right? Like, if I'm a
Mhm.
general manager and both of these positions are open, which one do I think I would have the best shot of turning into a Super Bowl roster? And I would say that I would probably go with the Jets, just because you've got the draft picks. You've got, that it's a young team, right? All their best players are in their first or second years of their contracts, right? Elijah Moore, Michael Carter, Mekhi Becton, Elijah Vera Tucker, Bryce Hall, like, all these guys are in the first or second years of their deals. So you've got all this draft capital going into next year, where you can just supplant the talent that you already have. And the biggest question that you have is Zach Wilson the guy, right? Well, the
Mhm.
Giants have that same question with Daniel Jones, and Zach Wilson's in year 1 while Daniel Jones is about to enter year 4. So
Mhm.
looking at it that way, I feel like I feel more comfortable saying the Jets, especially when you look at, again, a cap perspective, right? The Jets are going to
Mhm.
have over $48 million in cap space. The Giants are going to be entering cap hell. So looking at it that way as well, right, I think you have to say the Jets.
Yeah, I mean, that's a perfect way to look at it. I mean, as a Bears fan, I know that with cap wise, I mean, they're going to have $11 million in quarterbacks sitting on the bench next year. So, I mean, that's a huge way to look at it. And just you look at overall kind of the management and everything, and just I don't know, even kind of the fan sentiment. So I was going to also bring up, and I don't know if the Jets did this as well. But that whole Giant fan appreciation giveaway, the medium soda, uh, did you hear about that? And what were your thoughts
I
on
did
that?
not hear about that.
That that was for last weekend, and that was it was an official thing that went out in email, and all season ticket holders at that game were going to get a free medium soda. So it was kind of in even in Chicago radio, even today it was brought back up of how silly that was. I don't know if the Jets were doing the same thing or not.
No, I mean, I'm not a season ticket holder, but I haven't heard anything about that from the Jets. I mean, probably would get similar complaints as, like, this for what you've done to us for the last 10 years. A medium soda is definitely not good enough. Adam
Well,
Gase alone is not worth a medium soda. So
oh yeah, as a Bears fan, I know that Adam Gase, Bears dodged a bullet with him, but then they went with plenty of other worse options as well. But yeah, I mean, you think about it, you want to reward fans, for staying with you even through the tough times, and the Jets. I mean, there've been a lot of down times. Like, um, is there kind of hope then kind of going into the last few games here, or is it kind of a wait and see for like draft and everything?
I think from a fan perspective, when you watch a game, I mean, I always felt this way coming into the season, where I didn't care about wins and losses coming into the
Mhm.
year. I just cared about the product on the field. How did it look, right? Like, are there going to be competitive games, or are you just going to you're going to lay down and get beat by 40 points, right? And we saw that at times, right, where they did lay down and get beat by 30, 40 points, right? Like, but we've also seen them at times, fight, like, beat a team that they shouldn't have beat, like Tennessee or Cincinnati, right? Like, having some of those wins, and you seeing the young players actually be a part of it, in Elijah Moore, in a Michael Carter, in Elijah Vera Tucker, right? Like, Bryce Hall. These guys are, like, it's not like what it felt like, a few years ago as a Jet fan, when you're watching, like, Josh McCown throw to, like, Jermaine Curse, right? Like, I don't care about those guys. They're not going to be on the
Right.
roster in a year or 2 years from now, right? So this feels a little bit different. I think the biggest difference is that you want to you want an entire full season to be able to fairly evaluate Zach Wilson. And I think that's really what it is, right? Like, uh, you know, is he going to work in New York? I think the answer is unknown, right? We still don't know that, right? I think, this is a guy that he's missed some time this year with a knee injury. Um, I forget I don't even know how many starts he's had. I think it's like 10 or 11 starts in the NFL, right? So, a guy like that, you have to give him some time. But I also think it's tough because I think that, one of the things I said early on to my co-host Frank, I said, it's pretty clear that this guy's not going to be, one of the top 5 or 7 quarterbacks in the NFL, right? Like he's not going to be the Patrick Mahomeses. He's not going to be, Aaron Rodgers or Justin Herbert or Joe Burrow. Like he's not going to be talked about amongst those guys. But the question remains, can he be like a top 15 guy, right? Like, can he be like a Kirk Cousins or a Derek Carr, right? Or, people laugh about Andy Dalton. I think he was like the medium line, like quarterback 16, right? Like, can you be better than that, right? Like Matt Ryan had a good season, won an MVP, right? Like, can you have a year like that? Jimmy Garoppolo, right? Could you be just good enough to where if this roster around you is strong, that you can just give us a chance to win football games on Sundays and make it to the playoffs? And I think that is what we have to find out, because Jet fans might not want to hear it, but think about the end of 2018, the last 3 to 4 games of Sam Darnold's rookie year, how you felt going into the following offseason versus how you feel about Zach Wilson right now. Granted, he just had the big game, ran for 91 yards, franchise record, had a 52-yard touchdown. But before this game, like you were not feeling you weren't feeling overly confident about his overall performance on the year. I mean, he hasn't put together, let alone one full game. Like you'd like to see him put, 2-3 games together where you're like, okay, this guy, he's got it now. And I don't want to sound negative because he's played better these last few weeks, especially given the situation with the offensive line and the weapons on the outside, right? Him losing Elijah Moore, I mean, that definitely hurts. Didn't have Michael Carter for a chunk of the, of his time back. So that hurt as well. But I think next year, if we can get a full year of healthy offensive line, healthy weapons, even some upgraded weapons, could Zach Wilson look like, like I said, those Jimmy Garoppolos, the Derek Carrs, the Kirk Cousins of the world?
Yeah, I mean, going into the draft, I wasn't really, sold on Zach Wilson. It was interesting how they were showing the kind of side by sides of almost like an exact throw of what he did and Sam Darnold did. Just to see that, and when you look at him, obviously it's gonna, you want to take that full year to evaluate, but as of now, like how much different is he than Sam Darnold?
Yeah, you know what? I don't think you could say he's that much different, right? I mean, some of the same problems still plague him that plague Darnold, which is the turnovers. I mean, granted, he hasn't thrown an interception in his last 3 games. That's a nice streak that he's got going for him right now. But his penchant, I mean, 7 touchdowns to 11 interceptions through 11 games. That's not great. Um, but Darnold, they definitely have some similarities. It's funny because Eric Crocker, who does some scouting stuff with the Croc Report, also actually a former New York Jet, was with the Jets in training camp for a little bit. He made a comparison that honestly lives rent free in my head, and I cannot unsee it. Which was, he went on Twitter and did this rant about Zach Wilson being compared to Drew Lock.
Oh,
And now every time I watch Drew Lock play, I cannot get it out of my head, because there are some true similarities there between between these two quarterbacks. That, like, Zach Wilson has a penchant to break a clean pocket, right? People were talking about like why Mike White was having so much success. Well, Mike White's not as athletic as Zach Wilson. He honestly doesn't have any other choice but to sit in the pocket and wait for receivers to get open. Zach Wilson would break any sign of pressure. He evades the pocket, right? Like Leger Douzable, former New York Jet, posted on Twitter this morning, right? Like on the touchdown where Zach Wilson, evades, escapes pressure, runs for 53 yards. He had an open receiver. All he had to do is
Yeah.
step up in the pocket and deliver the football. But he's not going to do that. He'd rather, roll out the pocket and make a play. And I think that the Jets coaching staff has had some issues with him doing, with that playing within the structure of the offense, because that's what this Shanahan system, right? Because that's where Mike LaFleur comes from, the Kyle Shanahan coaching tree. And this is that West Coast Shanahan offense. It requires you to play within the system, go through your progressions, go from 1 to 2 to 3, and deliver the football. You're really playing point guard in that offense, not playmaker. So I'm hopeful that he can definitely make some strides, because the talent is there. It's just, are the Jets going to support him in terms of talent around him?
Yeah, and another point I was going to ask you too. He has the talent. Does he have the personality as well? Because the New York market, that can be a tough place to be a quarterback, right?
Yeah, that I still remain to. I'm still trying to figure that one out, right? Because you hear a lot of stuff, a lot of the good stuff, right? But then there's some comments that people like in the media that might have connections even to the Jets locker room, or you hear comments that they make, right? And it makes you wonder. Like Jay Feely, said something on the broadcast of the last game, which was like Zach Wilson has all the physical tools, and if he just has the humility to work on some of his deficiencies, then he could be a really good player. And it's like, what would strike Jay Feely to say something like that? Like he wouldn't just randomly say that unless he might have some information or something. But every time you hear the Jets players talk about Zach Wilson, it's all positive. So I'm genuinely curious to really see this and really see it play out, because if it is true that he's not the best personality or the best leader, it will come out, right? In New York, it's not going to stay quiet forever. So genuinely curious. But again, all of the stuff that you've heard from people within the organization, like, publicly, is that obviously, don't expect them to say much privately, but, or no, don't expect them to say anything differently publicly, but publicly it's all been positive.
Yeah, I kind of equate it, the beginning of a relationship, right? I mean, the players, they don't want to say anything bad about him. They want, they have a lot of invested in him to be the quarterback. Hopefully, for the Jets, he is the answer. Because yeah, you look at that roster, and there are, as you mentioned, a lot of really young players on. Obviously, team friendly early deals. I mean, Michael Carter, he's really come on. What makes him so good?
Honestly, it's a lot of things. His vision, his balance, his agility. I mean, his ability to force missed tackles. I think PFF put out a stat today. He's third in the NFL in forced missed tackles per rush attempt, at 26%, behind his teammate in North Carolina, Javonte Williams, who's at 33%, and then Nick Chubb, who's a beast in the NFL and has been doing this for a while, at 27%. And then, obviously there's Michael Carter. So that's pretty high praise there to be amongst, uh, you know, players obviously as talented as Nick Chubb and really good player in Javonte Williams. One of the things that I think makes him so good though too is his ability as a receiver out of the backfield. And, you know,
Mhm.
people that listen to my show, the Fantasy Football Diagnostics, or they even listen to Now We Have Liftoff, they will know that I was a huge Michael Carter fan in the pre-draft process. Like he was my running back 4 coming into it, from a dynasty perspective, or just even in general of like running backs that I want. Because that's how highly I thought of him. He and I said this a lot pre-draft, and I say it even more now. And I don't want people to hear, don't hear what I'm not saying. He doesn't. He's not on the same talent level as this player, but the things that he does on the football field really remind me of Alvin Kamara, right? Like the
Yeah.
way you are able to use him in space as a receiver out of the backfield. His ability to make defenders miss. He's a tough runner, right? Like he's a small guy, 5'8", 201 pounds. I mean, Alvin Kamara is a little bit bigger. I think Alvin Kamara is like 5'9", 214, something like that.
Mhm.
But Michael Carter has some of that same, the contact balance, the ability to make defenders miss, like the ability to set up a run by setting up some defenders, right? And he can be the way he's able to be used out of the backfield. I think he's a really good weapon for not just Zach Wilson, but this Jets offense and rookie OC Mike LaFleur.
Yeah, and I just wonder, like, with that backfield, how come North Carolina didn't, win more? I mean, obviously they've had good, but yeah, with that backfield, that's just nuts.
Yeah, I mean, what people may not even remember is that Michael Carter led the UNC backfield in yards from scrimmage for 3 consecutive seasons. Even when Javonte Williams was having that phenomenal year, like Michael Carter still led the team in yards from scrimmage, right? Like this dude is a producer regardless of how you get him the football.
I mean, and just kind of looking at, Mac Brown as a coach. I mean, he's got a history of recruiting and developing, some running backs. I mean, back to Ricky Williams. So that's awesome, to see that.
Yeah, definitely.
So, talking about kind of receivers as well, kind of, going into next year, is there a clear cut number one receiver going forward? I mean, you've had, Denzel Mims kind of just, it was supposed to be him, right? And who is the number one, receiver kind of going forward?
I mean, it's got to be the dude whose jersey is hung up on my wall behind me,
Yeah.
Elijah Moore. I, that dude is an absolute stud, man. And we talked about me liking players pre-draft, and don't get me wrong, I liked Elijah Moore. I
Hmm.
just remember saying, the Jets need to go get Rondale Moore, right? And Rondale Moore is a good player, and I like him a lot, but Elijah Moore has been everything that this Jets offense could have needed. He's a true number one receiver. I actually comped him when he was coming out to Tyler Lockett,
Mm.
and some of his ability to be an outside, because he was a guy that in college he played primarily in the slot. That was really all he did. And so people thought he was a slot receiver only, but I was like, no, this is a guy that he can get vertical down the field. You can play him on the outside. He can make people miss after the catch. So I really like him, as an outside receiver. And he's shown that with the Jets, his ability to play on the outside as well as play on the inside. I mean, you go to look at the Miami Dolphins game. He cooked all those corners. Xavier Howard on some targets. Who's a really good corner. I
Hmm.
also got Byron Jones a lot. I mean, in that game, with 8 catches on 11 targets for 141 receiving yards and a touchdown. I mean, when you go over his last 6 games, I mean, he's currently out with a quad injury and out on COVID, but you just look at his last 6 games, he's on a 16-game pace of 136 targets, 91 receptions, just over 1,200 yards and 13 touchdowns. That's a really good receiver. That would have been second to just Justin Jefferson last year, who obviously had a really good year. But Elijah Moore, I mean, since week 8 in that game against Cincinnati, when he had 6 for 67 and a touchdown, he had just been on a run. I mean, he cooked Darius Slay in week 13, and Darius Slay has been having a really good year, has been really shutting down outside receivers. He went 6 for 77 on 12 targets and a touchdown. I mean, he's just been phenomenal.
Yeah, and you look at it too, and it's come with like just inconsistent quarterback play, right?
Yeah, I mean, include games with Mike White, includes 3 quarters with Josh Johnson, who just made a start for the Baltimore Ravens.
Yeah.
It includes a game with Joe Flacco, and then getting a game again with some games here with the rookie Zach Wilson. So regardless of who the quarterback has been, he's produced. I mean, he scored in was it? He scored, I think, 5 touchdowns in his last 6 games. So he's just been an absolute producer for the entire Jets offense. And the thing that sucks is that you haven't been able to see we haven't been able to see him and Michael Carter both on at the same time. I mean, the closest to that was the Cincinnati game, Cincinnati and Indianapolis. Actually, I guess we had like 3 weeks of them both playing, but what you really didn't have is like Zach Wilson being a part of that either, right? Like you didn't have Zach Wilson with Elijah Moore with Michael Carter all playing at a high level. Like we haven't seen that yet. So, but I think going forward, we had DJ Bienemy, who reports for the New York Daily News. We had him on our pod, right before the season started. He talked about Elijah Moore being one of the best receivers, potentially being one of the best receivers in football. His ability to create separation. I've seen a lot of Antonio Brown comparisons, which when you watch him run routes, you watch him on his releases, the savviness that he runs with, the purpose with which he moves when he's running his routes. I'm like, okay, Antonio Brown makes the Antonio Brown comps make a ton of sense because this dude is really that nice when it comes to running routes.
Yeah, that's awesome to hear. That's kind of why I was on the Devontae Smith bandwagon with the Eagles. Is you have a great route runner, someone who's able to get open, and I mean that's a huge part in the NFL.
Absolutely, 110%. If you can't get open, right? Like, and we see this with as Jet fans, we see this all the time with Denzel Mims, right? Like, he's probably not long for New York. Is probably, not going to be a New York Jet beyond this year, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of that has to do with his inability to create separation, right? Like, he doesn't. I mean, a lot of times it looks like it's a lack of effort as well, but he doesn't create any separation. So it doesn't matter how big, how fast, how strong you are, if you can't get open, and you can't even make a contested catch, like there's not going to be much opportunity for you to really make plays in the NFL.
Yeah, and speaking about opportunities to kind of fill in, beyond Elijah Moore, I mean, Keelan Cole and obviously Braxton Berrios are those going to be kind of players going into next year as well?
Yeah, I think Keelan Cole might. I don't know, if I'm not mistaken, I think he was on a 1 year deal, so maybe they do bring him back. I know Corey Davis will obviously be back
That's
as the number
right.
two, the number two receiver. Braxton Berrios, I think they have to do whatever they can to bring him back, actually, because I think he is a free agent as well. Because he's just been making play after play, and you look at obviously Jamison Crowder, he's in the last year of his deal. So I mean, this receiving core is so up in the air, right? Like
Yeah.
the only people are going to be guaranteed to be on this roster after this year in terms of that receiving core are Elijah Moore and Corey Davis, right? So
Mm-hmm.
they have to I mean, there's talks of them using one of they have their pick and Seattle's pick, which both going to be top 7, top 8 picks. So they have the ability to use one of those on a game changing wide receiver. Take a similar route to what the Bengals did with Joe Burrow. Excuse me, sorry. But they have an opportunity to, if they could bring back Braxton Berrios, who's an ascending player as opposed to like
Mm-hmm.
Jamison Crowder, who's probably like a descending player. Like they're going in opposite directions at this point in their career.
Yeah.
Braxton Berrios can do some of those same things that Crowder does, and you could pay him probably a little bit cheaper, and also adds the value he adds in the return game as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's definitely, done quite a bit lately, and just being that extra piece, I think, is helpful as well. And you look at, moving on to the other side of the ball. What do you see? Some of the defensive like strengths and weaknesses of the Jets, and then maybe some key players as well, because there've been a lot of injuries also, right?
Yeah, they've been there was a statistic out there, I forgot who put it out, but the Jets are they've had the worst injury luck of any team in the NFL. You know they've lost some key players at key positions, right? Like Mekhi Becton was lost in the first game of the season. So he, unlikely that we see him this year. Carl Lawson was lost. The edge rusher was lost before they even played a snap of football,
Yeah.
of real football. Um, Marcus May, he tore his Achilles in the Indianapolis game in week 9. Lamarcus Joyner, who they had at safety, he got hurt in week 1. Um, they just been ravaged by COVID recently as well. So
Mhm.
they have a lot of issues across the team. But when you look at them defensively, the strength coming into this year, we said it in the preseason breakdowns. The strongest the strongest unit of this team was the defensive line. When you look at, again, Carl Lawson, who they signed over from Cincinnati for a big money free agent deal. They have obviously Quentin Williams, who has made, he was a third overall pick from Alabama. He's
Mhm.
made some impact, especially in his third year. John Franklin Myers, who just got paid recently, he's made a ton of impact as well. Foley Fatukasi, who again one of the best interior run defenders in the NFL. Sheldon Rankins. So this is a talented defensive line, but you walk into the year, you lose Carl Lawson, you lose his replacement in Bryce Huff. So you don't really have an edge presence to the point where John Franklin Myers can play on the edge, but he's a guy you probably want on the edge on first and second down, and you want to slide him in on third down, slide him into the interior to get probably a better matchup while you bring some more speed on the field. Well, because of the lack of edge presence, he's had to be a full-time edge player, which doesn't, it's fine. He can get away with it, but it's not really using him to the best of his ability. Um, and so this D line really needs, it could really use an edge rusher. I know there's talks, if they could get the number one pick, that they would use it on Aiden Hutchinson, or they could even, try to go get, the Kayvon Thibodeau if he's able to fall to them in the top four. But um, they also, we thought corner was going to be their weakest position group. It's probably been their most consistent position group on that side of the ball. Bryce Hall, he's been a really good corner. He's not like a stud corner in the Darrell Revis mold, or gonna shut down your team's number one receiver, because they don't really play football that way. But he's really good, really solid. Where he's been very dependable. Brandon Echols, who was a 6th-round pick. I mean, again, and they've got a 5th-round pick in Bryce Hall, a 6th-round pick in Brandon Echols starting at the other corner, and then a 5th-round pick in Michael Carter the second, because this team does have 2 Michael Carters, one on both sides of the ball. Michael Carter the second, who's been one of the best nickel corners in all of football, and he's a 5th-round pick. So they don't have a lot of draft capital spent on that side of the ball, in that defensive secondary in terms of corners, but they've been solid. I think what they really could use, though, is because they don't really have a guy back there that can change the game, right? That can take the ball away. Again, Bryce Hall has been great, has 0 interceptions on the year. Everything has just been pass deflection. There was a point in the season where the defensive line had more interceptions than the
Wow.
secondary. It wasn't until the Miami game, I think in week 11, where that actually changed, where the safeties were actually tied with the defensive linemen for interceptions. But it still
Wow.
remains that the defensive line still has more interceptions than the cornerback group. So that can't happen. You're not going to have success playing in the NFL on defense if you can't force turnovers, if you can't turn the ball over. So I think what they really will try to do is address safety, because they do need somebody on the back end of that, on their back end that can, really solidify that and help again take the ball away. They have Jason Pinnock, who was a corner, actually their first corner that they drafted, I believe, in the 5th round. I think he might have been the second corner they drafted. They moved him over to safety. In his first start, he had actually a pretty good game. Had a decent a good PFF grade for his first start. So curious to see if his development can continue, and maybe they don't have to use significant capital to address that spot. But I think that one of the other things that they could definitely use is another linebacker, because CJ Mosley, he's been great, but he's getting up there in age. There's some plays that he could have made, he would have made 2-3 years ago, that he's not making right now. He's still a really good player. I just think that they need somebody who can play in today's NFL and play against these running backs in space, and these slot receivers or these positionless players, right? Like, you watched the Miami Dolphins play yesterday. Jalen Waddle was in the backfield on how many snaps? Like, he was playing wide receiver. Like, you can't, it's not about wide receivers anymore or running backs. It's about weapons, and you have to have, you know, we said this on the show last week, and a lot of Jet fans would go crazy, but this team really needs is like a Jamal Adams because
Right.
they don't have a guy that can just wreak havoc and just run around like their hair's on fire, making plays on defense. So they need somebody on the second level of that defense, so specifically like their version of San Francisco's Fred Warner.
Yeah, and all the players you kind of brought up, it seems like the Jets have really done well in those later rounds. And obviously, with the way the record has been, they've been higher up. But then also having some of these later round picks really hit. I mean, that's huge. When you look at filling out a roster and looking at then, do you trust ownership and the general manager to make decisions now, kind of going into next year and the year beyond?
Yeah, well, Joe Douglas, who's currently the general manager, his so it's funny because after the 2020 draft, you felt really good about him, right? Like
Yeah.
you got Mekhi Becton that we needed. We needed a left tackle. We got him. We needed a wide receiver. And Jet fans, say what you want now, but 7 out of 10 Jet fans all wanted Denzel Mims in the second round, and we got him. So Jet fans felt really good about that. Ashton Davis was, a third round safety who was dubbed as like, a player who could develop into like the free safety of the future here. After that, it kind of went downhill. Like the 4th round pick was like LaMichael Pirine. I didn't like that pick, and hasn't been great. James Morgan was another 4th round pick, which is like, why are you taking a quarterback that early, for a backup quarterback that early? And then he's not even on the roster. And figure out what else they ended up doing with Bryce Hall was actually one of those 5th round picks. That turns out to be a really good pick. You get a starting corner there. But again, you look at that draft class now, Mekhi Becton hasn't played since week 1. Denzel Mims has been a major disappointment, and that would be an understatement. Ashton Davis, he's starting, but not really helping. So you look at that draft class, and it's like you don't feel great about it. But then you look at the 2021 draft class, and you feel really, really good about this class. Elijah Vera Tucker, he's been great. Like Elijah Moore, he's been great. Michael Carter, he's been really good. Again, like you're able to draft a starting nickel in Michael Carter the 2nd and the 5th round. You're able to get a solid starting corner and Brandon Echols in the 6th. You get a guy who can come in and play safety for you in a pinch, and Jason Pinnock in the 5th, right? So like, I missed Braden Mann, the punter that they took last year. So that was actually a good pick that Joe Douglas did. But there were some talks last year too of Joe Douglas and the coaching staff last year, because it was Adam Gase's coaching staff. That, like, there were some talks that Adam Gase and his coaching staff couldn't even tell you what the prototypical player for their system was, which would make it really hard for you to pick to find players. Versus this year, where it seems like the Jets coaching staff and the front office is really in sync, and it showed through the draft class and how the Jets are actually using these players and the production that they're giving you on the football field. So I think when you kind of throw out 2020, you kind of can really trust Joe Douglas to at least help a competent coaching staff get the players that they need. In terms of ownership, I could say that I trust them now because it seems like that they've given the full reins to Joe Douglas for this to be his football team and for him to have his whole handprint on it. And I think when you have that as a Jet fan, you feel really confident, because the less involved Woody Johnson and his posse are, the better you feel as a Jet fan.
Well, yeah, and you look at their choice of Robert Saleh. I mean, outside looking in, I mean, he was a really solid coach. It seems like a solid guy. In this year, what are you grading him now, and just kind of bringing the team together in this year?
Yeah, this is an interesting question because Saleh is. You also have to understand, like, the team. Okay, the team is 4-11. Technically, I guess he doesn't even get credit for that win because he didn't coach it. So he's 3-11 as the Jets head coach, and wow, I guess if you look at it, the Jets are 1-0 without him. So,
Oh, uh-oh.
but no, so he's 3-11 as the Jets head coach, and you also have to understand, right? Like the Jets are playing one of the youngest teams in football. They are also, like I previously said, the most injured team in football. So you kind of have to grade on a curve, but at the same time, I also understand like there were some games and some performances and some decisions that like shouldn't have been made or
Mm.
shouldn't like that you weren't happy with. And so with that, I'm probably going to give him like a D plus C minus for year one. That's kind of where I'm at, in that borderline. And really it's about like the second half, the fact that this team comes out flat in like the first half of every game, they've done that. It's been very upsetting. It's been very frustrating. The fact that that they at times look like they've coached scared. The New England game, the first New England game, they look like they coached scared in the second half of that game, and then you go out to Denver, the second week, and they coached scared that entire game. That the fact that they were able to but then they do get wins against Tennessee and Cincinnati, wins that you don't expect them to get. They go out and beat Houston, which is a win that you expect them to get, even though Houston was coming off of a win against Tennessee. But
Mhm.
like, it was like, you have to win this game. So like, I understand it, but there's also the fact that they've given up like 30 points. Um, they'd given up like 30 points in like 4 of their last 5 games or something like that. But like it up by a week. Was it week 7, week 8, week 7 to week 10, they had given up 30 at least 30 points in every game. And it's like, you're the defensive minded head coach. Like, how is your defense giving up this many points? But then again, like I said before, the injuries and things. So it's like I'm grading him on a curve, but I have like things better get better next year is kind of where I'm at with Salah.
Do you feel like you're a little bit and maybe Jets Twitter, and Jets fans are a little bit more critical of him because of what happened with Adam Gase, because that was just a train wreck, right?
Yeah, I think Jet fans, just in general, are out of patience at this point.
Yeah.
You see it with Zach Wilson a lot, where like a lot of the leeway that like Sam Darnold would have gotten or that Mark Sanchez would have gotten, like Zach Wilson doesn't get some of those same loyalties or some of the same treatment that those quarterbacks have gotten in the past. Salah, I think, doesn't because of that, because of Zach Wilson and because of some of the stuff that's gone on defensively, probably isn't getting some of that same leeway as well, right? Like when you look at Rex Ryan got here, right? Like Rex Ryan had led, the Jets were like a top 2 defense, right? But like there's also the fact that when Rex Ryan got here, the Jets had already been like a top 10 defense. So like, you know, they're again dealing with like there's different circumstances at play. Salah walked into like one of the worst situations that you could walk into. So I would like to think that with another year of getting, players for your system and your scheme, because again, the Jets did not spend like they didn't spend any premium picks on offense, right? Like they had 2 first round picks, a second round pick, and a third round pick last year. Or no third round pick. They had a fourth round pick that they used. All 4 of those picks went to on the offensive side of the football. So when you look at that, it's like understandable how this defense could be so bad. And so that's why I'm kind of willing to give Salah a little bit of the benefit of the doubt there. But I would like to see him get better in year 2 for sure.
Yeah, I mean, you look at it, this team does, have some offensive pieces, and you brought it up with Robert Saleh being, defensive coach. I mean, if that's what you're known for, that's what you want to see. I mean, as a Bears fan, Matt Nagy was supposed to be the offensive guy, and his offense, it's just a crazy stat of like how few points they scored when he has actually been calling the plays. And with the Jets, I mean, do you feel like they have the right coordinators in place, kind of below Salah as well?
Yeah, I mean, starting defensively, because I feel like that's a little bit easier to unpack. Jeff Ulbrich is the D coordinator there. He came from Atlanta, and if you know anything about his time in Atlanta, it was with Dan Quinn. And Dan Quinn
Mhm.
at times would take over the Atlanta defense. And when he would do that, for whatever reason, the Atlanta defense would play terribly. But once Jeff Ulbrich would get involved and Raheem Morris would get involved, you'd see the Atlanta defense like play much better. And the Atlanta defense has some talent on it too, right? When you look at some of the players that they have, like Jon Jones and Foye Olakun and Grady Jarrett, like they've got some dogs on that side of the ball. So I think if you're able to bring some talent in here, similar to what not entirely similar, but if you're just able to get some good talent in here, Jeff Ulbrich could make some good things happen on that side of the ball. Offensively, the Jets have the best offensive coordinator that they've had in I think my time watching them. Right, like we have not had an offensive coordinator that is this innovative, that's that's able to make adjustments the way he is, the pre-snap motion that he uses. I mean, and it's not like he's doing crazy, ridiculous stuff, right? Like he's just not afraid. He doesn't coach scared. Mike LaFleur. It doesn't matter if the Jets are playing with their first string quarterback or their fourth string quarterback, right? Like
Mhm.
he's going to. It always reminds me, and this is why I was a huge Brian Daboll fan,
Mhm.
the current OC for Buffalo, because there was a game and this game sticks out to me so much. The Jets were playing, it was in 2017. The Jets are playing with like Josh McCown. No, it's 2018 rather. The Jets are playing with Josh McCown because Sam Darnold had injured his foot or something. And so he couldn't play against the Buffalo in that first game. Buffalo's also playing without their quarterback, Josh Allen, at the time, and they're playing with like Matt Barkley, and who I think was at their second or third string quarterback at the time, or whatever. And so I remember the Jets going to that game like the Jets should win this game. They're playing with a veteran backup while the Bills are playing with Matt Barkley, and Brian Daboll pulls out all the stops, like starts calling all these trick plays, trying to manufacture offense any way he can, and it's like that's what an offensive coordinator should do, right?
Mhm.
Like your job is to score points, not look professional while doing it, right?
Yep.
Like so
Yep.
just like the fact that Mike LaFleur gets that, right? Like the 3rd and 15 call that they made last week. I tweeted this out after the Sunday night during the Sunday night game. Like the Jets were able to run a play on 3rd and 15. I don't know if you've seen it, where Braxton Berrios catches a pass, throws it, or no, James
Yes.
Crowder catches a pass, throws it short of the sticks behind the line of scrimmage, even to Braxton Berrios, who then runs for 15 or 16 yards to convert a 3rd and long. And I'm watching Sunday Night Football, and it's 3rd and 15 or 3rd and 16, and Dallas ran that play, and I'm like, a team just ran a play, just stole a play from the Jets. Like I've never ever seen that in my entirety as a Jets fan. So Michael LaFleur has been really good. I've also been really nervous as of late, which is like, what if he's too good? And
Right.
this is something that people talked about, was like, hey, well, the Jets should have hired an offensive minded head coach, because what if, your offensive coordinator gets poached because your offense is doing so well? And at the time, people were like, oh, well, if that happens, that's a good problem. That'd be the best problem that the Jets could have. And now I'm looking at it and I'm like, that's actually like a legitimate problem here, because you don't know if Zach Wilson's the guy.
Yeah.
And if Michael LaFleur leaves, I'll become very nervous about the next person calling plays.
Well, yeah, and especially at this stage of development. I mean, like as a Bears fan, kind of going back to, I didn't look at this season for wins. I wanted to see development. It'll be interesting to see who kind of fills in, with the coach. Presumably Nagy will be gone. But yeah, I mean, when you look at development wise, you want to have someone there long term, to really kind of work with a quarterback and hopefully develop those plays together.
Yeah, and it's that's one of the things I thought about. Right, it's like you expect a lot coming for Zach Wilson going into year two because you expect him to be more comfortable second year in the system, right? Like, no, and I love Justin Fields. I thought he was the second best quarterback in this class. I thought he should have got, been taken as such
Hmm.
to the New York Jets, but that didn't happen. But Justin Fields is going to be learning a second offense in 2 years, right? Like we
Hmm.
assume Matt Nagy's going to get fired, right? So that'll be his situation. Zach Wilson will be going into his second. Trevor Lawrence even will be learning a
Yeah.
second offense in 2 years.
Yep.
Mac Jones, Trey Lance, and Zach Wilson, they'll all be within the same scheme again for the second consecutive year. And I think that's important, especially for a
Hmm.
young quarterback. Sam Darnold had to learn three different offenses in I think 3 years in New York or 3 years in New York. So no, that's not true. Well, he had two different offenses in 2 different years. No, that's actually no, he did. He had three
Yeah.
different. Sorry, I take it back. He
No.
had three different offensive coordinators in 3 years in New York. So it's like, how do you get stability that way, right? Like Mark Sanchez even had to deal with some of that, right? Like, after Brian Schottenheimer was fired, he had to deal with, three different OCs. Like, how do you get continuity that way? And I think Zach
Hmm.
Wilson having continuity, that will be good for him. One of the things I do say about this scheme, and what was one of the reasons why even I wasn't concerned if Mike LaFleur does potentially get poached, is that Robert Saleh didn't just bring in any random OC. He brought in a system, right? Like
Hmm.
and the Shanahan system has disciples all over the NFL. So all you got to do is get somebody that was in that tree, had either learned it from Shanahan himself. You've got Matt LaFleur over there in Green Bay. I'm sure has an assistant over there too, right? Like
Hmm.
Zach Taylor in Cincinnati, Sean McVay with the Rams, right? Like, so you've got these guys around the league where you can go to a staff and get, maybe poach somebody's quarterback coach or the receivers coach to come, run this offense for you, call plays. But at the end of the day, Mike LaFleur has been the best I've seen at doing it this year. So, for the New York Jets.
Absolutely. Well, this has been fantastic. I definitely, have learned a ton. So where can everyone find you again?
Yeah, it's at JR Football Nerd on Twitter. Contrary to what many believe, it's not Junior Football Nerd. Made sense in my head when I made it that it would just read JR Football Nerd. But if that's where you could find my personal tweets, my content I'll share out from there as well. I haven't been as active on Twitter between work and the holidays and things like that. So, but still putting out content, right?
Mhm.
Fantasy Football Diagnostics podcast. Again, we run every week. So if you definitely want, if you're into fantasy football, if you got your fantasy finals coming up this week, or even if your league is archaic and you play in week 18, like we'll still be here for you as well. Doing our breakdowns where we break down every single game from again, like I said, the totals, the sides. We do the fantasy analysis. We do starts of the week. We do streamers of the week. So anything fantasy related, you could find over there. Also, if you are a Jets fan, I'm assuming you listening to this particular episode with heavy ears. It's because you are a Jet fan and you're just looking for some Jet content. So if you're looking for any more Jet content, then you can definitely find that on the Now We Have Liftoff New York Jets podcast, where we go once a week live every Tuesday. So we actually will be going live shortly here today. 4:30 Eastern, 4:35, 5 p.m. Eastern. Uh, Timing is a little flexible, but we will be going live. If you miss it, you can definitely catch us on YouTube, or you could catch us on the now. You could catch us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, wherever podcasts can be found. But Now We Have Liftoff New York Jets podcast is how you can find it.
Awesome. Well, this has been great. I definitely appreciate your time. And once again, this has been NFL Outdated Cover two series on the New York Jets with John. Thanks again.
Thanks, Andy. This has been a blast, man, and I definitely hope to do it again, brother.
Absolutely. We'll catch you soon.